There's nothing like being in the stands cheering on your favorite team. Game Time is your hack to unlocking amazing tickets in just a few taps. Plus, their Game Time guarantee means you can trust you'll get 100% authentic tickets at the best price. Fees are always included, so what you see is what you pay. Get the best deals on sports tickets. Download the Game Time app and create an account to start searching for tickets to upcoming games and events. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Game Time.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Welcome to episode 199 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is Jason Ferguson, the chairman and CEO of the World Professional Billiards and Snooker Association, and the director at the World Snooker Tour. We spoke about transitioning from player to CEO, growing the sport in Asia, women and men competing against each other, the difference between snooker, pool, and billiards, Olympic inclusion, growing up in a mining town, his time as a mayor, and much more. Jason Ferguson, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you, Marcus. It's an absolute pleasure to speak with you finally. I know we've been trying to connect for a while, so thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the show. Really exciting. Closing in on 200 episodes. Have never covered the sports of billiards or snooker, so really excited about that. And you are definitely the guy to talk to. You're the chairman of the World Professional Billiards and Snooker Association, as well as the director at the World Snooker Tour. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do on a daily basis?
Sure. I'd love to. First of all, 200 episodes and no snooker. We must change this. So let's hope it's not another 200 until we speak again. And I'm sure it won't be because we're extremely busy. So look, my day to day, my main role is I'm chairman and CEO actually of the World Professional Billiards and Snooker Association. That's snooker's world governing body. We have another company at the side of us called World Snooker Limited. That is the owner of the World Snooker Tour that you see on your TV screens around the world. And our shareholder in the World Snooker Tour, in that company, is Matchroom Sports, who are obviously into multi-sports, boxing and everything else. So we have this company between us. And then within my role as WPBSA chair, that's a lot of governance of the sport, rules, regulations, disciplinary. But actually, as part of that, we're heavily involved in sport development. This is the bit I love so much. I love the fact that we're going into the unknown, into new territories and really building the sport from the ground up. And to do that, we have a group of organizations underneath WPBSA, which runs women's snooker, which runs disability snooker, which runs English billiards, which is our founding sport, and also lots of things like junior development. And we also have a body that runs kind of a World Amateur Championship, World Junior Championships. This is like open qualifying for the World Snooker Tour. So I really love this side. Actually, I'm heavily invested personally with all my time in sport development. That's the bit that makes it tick.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. And, you can see and hear the excitement. There's a lot to talk about. I have so many things I want to discuss with you. But just before we jump into that, we have mentioned it's snooker, it's billiards, it's pool. There are a lot of different, just like on a, basic how to differentiate these different names.
It's a really good question, actually, because we use this term billiard sports, and a billiard sports is a general term for anything that is billiard related, played on a pool table, a snooker table, a billiard table. This may range from a table you'll see in a bar, or it might evolve into some of the more professional snooker clubs that we've got. So it's really billiards is a really general term, and actually it's very much a dictionary term in a lot of languages. So it's become the common theme. But my focus is snooker and English billiards. So English billiards is 3 balls on a what you would term as a snooker table, which is a 12-foot by 6 snooker table. Billiards was the founding sport to all cue sports, really. And it originated from the great country houses. It was once played outside. And in fact, that's why the cloth is green. Because of the English weather, it was brought indoors. So there you go. So a little bit of history. So the actual term billiards is general. My role is snooker and English billiards, and snooker is by far the biggest television sport which has been professionalized in billiard sports. And look, listen, many of the other sports do very well. Pool in particular is massive from a participation point of view. From a viewership, snooker is much bigger. And we've got to the stage now. There's around 100 national championships around the world, plus regional bodies, regional championships, tour qualifying, and the Professional World Snooker Tour, which is really the elite of the sport worldwide. That's made up of 128 full-time players.
Interesting. And thank you for some background and some history there. That's great. You mentioned business development and that you're working a lot on that, and you mentioned matchroom sports. So that was something that you were involved with around 2010, that shift. So how has that shift been, and why was that something that you did?
Wow. I mean, this is it's a great story, actually. It's one that I will actually write down one day when I can find the time. But it is a great journey that we've been on in our sport. Snooker was invented in 1875, and it originated from billiards, as I'd previously said. And, over the years, what had happened with snooker, it had its own, typical governing body called the Billiards and Snooker Control Council and so on, which is actually still the name on our World Championship trophy, which you'll see presented every year. And over the years, those sort of an amalgamation of bodies ended up at the end of the road. And the WPBSA was founded to try and professionalize the sport. And it began as a body that looked after players' interests. Players actually didn't earn money from prize money back then. They earned money by doing exhibitions, shows, evenings, entertainment. And actually, it almost became a members club for those people. What evolved, particularly through late 70s into the 1980s, was WPBSA became more of a governing body. It had more structure and it became an event manager. But actually, it was a real mixed bag of part-time promoter, part-time governance, part-time development, part-time member support. And as we know in the world today, and particularly in the legal world that we live in, you can't bundle all those things into one pot. It just doesn't work. So it got to the point, certainly through the 1990s, snooker had gone into some decline. It had had a boom in the 80s in predominantly UK, Northern Europe, but it had gone into decline in the 90s, and it had reached, I think by the end of the 90s, it had reached a point where something needed to be done with the sport. And actually, I believe it or not, I started my life as a snooker player. So I'll put that on the table first. Now, Marcus, you're nowhere near old enough to remember me as a snooker player, but I started my career playing snooker, and I was asked by former world champion Terry Griffiths, whilst I was a young player, to get involved in the administration of the sport. And I think this is a theme of many governing bodies. You'll find many people come from the sport and go into administration. At the time, it was an organisation run by players. And that was the point, really, of trying to bring some of the younger players in. So I joined the board in 1999 and actually served the association for a good few years, actually, in what was a first term for me. And during that term, it was highly volatile, highly political. Lots of federations will relate to that. And actually, I left in the early 2000s, and really, at that time, I had just I'd got a real passion for developing the sport. And within that, I'd started some work in Asia. And that involved a central hub that we developed in Thailand. Out from there, we started work in China and some of those early markets. But it was very small back then. And the organization was much smaller than it is today. I left the sport, and it wasn't really until about 8 years later, the phone rang, and it was Barry Hearn, the promoter Barry Hearn. I knew of Barry, didn't know him well, but I knew of him because he'd been in and out of snooker over the years, and he was obviously a very famous promoter. So I knew of him, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, what do you got in mind?" He said, "Well, look, snooker's in a bit of decline and a bit of trouble again, and there's a lot of politics around it." He said, "Well, they said the sport needs to be sorted out." So I was asked then to join it to become part of a team to look at restructuring the sport. And what you see today, since that restructure was completed in 2010, what came out of that was this breakup of the company. So we broke up governance away from operations and promoting events, and then broke up. In more recent times, we broke up our player support. So we, in federation terms, we'd call that the Athletes Commission. It's now called WPBSA Players. It's chaired by Ken Doherty, former world champion, and it's a players' body that provides support for players and looks after players' interests. We, as a governing body, we can focus on sports development, governing the sport, disciplinary rules, regulations, and all those things. And World Snooker, with the World Snooker Tour, can focus on delivering high quality broadcast events. So we've broken this mold. So to put that into context, 2010, we had 6 major events, plus I think 1 or 2 invitation events that were popping up and down, predominantly UK based. So the real core of the market was still UK with UK broadcasters. That restructure allowed snooker to develop I think for the first time, it gave it the room to develop as a real international sport. It gave it wings to go off into new places and really start to work on the ground. And it wasn't long until I'd set off back to Asia and really got my teeth into sport development around China and so on. And it was great. It was great. It was a great journey because those 6 or 7 events. We're now well over 20 events every year on the World Snooker Tour. Some of those events are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Our broadcast is getting bigger and bigger every year. We're not in the millions, we're in the billions now in terms of television reach. And our social media output, our digital broadcast output, it's absolutely vast, really. It's vast. And that one thing is the shop window that's allowed the sport to develop and provided the inspiration. But the real trick to what's happened in snooker has been how we've taken the sport's development at both ends. So we, as a governing body, we've been developing the sport from the ground up. So take, for example, when we arrive in China, there's very little in terms of events, 1 or 2, very little in terms of infrastructure. We've developed that infrastructure from the bottom up. And what you see now is, I think it's the second largest watch sport in China now. And there are 300,000 billiard clubs in China, plus maybe more. And the sport is just massive there. But it wasn't just about television and broadcast and major events. It was about infrastructure, and it was about development of talent, and it was about development of referees and officials and development in local areas, because when you're dealing with big countries like China, you've got to get on the ground. So it's been a really interesting journey for me, and it's been great. And I think to put that into context of why we keep going like we do, it's a bit like, for me, it was a bit like winning a snooker event. The feeling of seeing something develop and seeing it work and seeing a new event or seeing a new opportunity, it's very rewarding work, Marcus. I have to say, it's gets me up every day very early on. It's terrific.
Yeah, fantastic. So you still have that competitive drive, even though you're not a player, but now it's more towards goals in the business setting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, my role, I guess it feels like winning a world championship, if you know what I mean. To have this ability to lead an organization and have really going back those 16 years, have a run at putting a team together, building it how you want, how you think it can be built, because it had never been done before on this scale. And some of it was risk, some of it was developing small things, and some of it was just boomed and grown. So it's great. It's like, I think playing sport actually does give you a lot that you can bring to the table. You have a discipline, of course, because you've been a sports person. But also I think it gives you a bit of, sports people generally are good at focusing on things, I think. So it's been an interesting life so far.
So far, and it's a long way to go. You mentioned infrastructure. That's someone like, well, obviously when you move a sport in your country, as you said, like this, finding talents, referee, maybe coaches, like you don't have that type of things on site already. But when you say infrastructure, what do you mean? Is it some type of stadiums, or is it tables per se, or is it more of a structure?
For me in sport, it's more structural, because the one thing you want to do is provide opportunity for all. And I think if we all as sports administrators look at the world and go, you know what, we want everybody, give every child a cue. How do we do that? Well, it isn't always about building stadiums and building fancy places. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's very often about going in on the ground, and activity may come out of a youth club or a street corner where there's a small table. Whereas at the other end of the scale, it may come from our elite academy in Beijing. So, you just never know where the talent's going to come from and where the interest in the sport is going to grow. And usually it comes from both. So it was structural, really, in many ways. It was about building coaching schemes and building training schemes and going into places that perhaps you could put tables in. Whether that be a school, whether it be a university, whether it be local community space. But it's about going into those areas and saying, you know what, we could bring you some snooker here. What do you think? And the coaching scheme is one of the great successes of all this, actually, because we as a body at WPBSA, we only had a coaching scheme which supported our 128 professional players. And there were only maybe a dozen of those that wanted to go into coaching. So the coaching scheme was tiny, actually. Well, now it isn't. Now our coaching scheme is global, and our coaching scheme has different levels. It's a proper teaching qualification. Some of those coaches are very community-based. They don't need to be upskilled to the highest level. Some of those coaches are bringing hundreds and hundreds of people through their centres a week. And some of them are training elite players at a very high level, only one or two. So it's a real mixed bag. But it's that side of it's really grown. And I think the rest follows naturally. Snooker has grown and boomed naturally off the back of activity. And like I said earlier on, I think a lot of that has come from inspirational opportunities which have been broadcast around the world. Everybody can make it in our sport. And I'm very proud to say that. There are no barriers, actually. And, people see it, they inspire to play it. They know they can achieve in it because they can see other people doing it. And then it's about mapping out how you can do that and where players can play. And we're still in the phase of looking at facilities. I think we battle for facilities sometimes because snooker tables are not easy, and it's not just the ball that you can throw on the ground and kick around. It does need a little bit of infrastructure. And I think that's the big challenge for our sport, is to keep maintaining the growth of that infrastructure.
I understand. When growing the sport, you mentioned China and Asia, and obviously that's a market with a lot of people. But were there any other opportunities that you saw in Asia for why that would be a good market to grow in?
Yeah, I mean, Asia is amazing. Asia loves snooker. I think it's a natural fit. I think for some reason, I think in many ways, let's take China as a great example, as probably our biggest success outside of the UK. It's a nation that has sort of embraced the sport. I think they like the technical side of it, and I think not everybody is built for rugby or very intense physical sports, and I think it's very much suited people in Asia. I also think that it's something that's proved to be very good at improving concentration and focus, and I think some of the education side has seen it as very attractive for that as well. And of course, it's sportsmanship and etiquette is something that's helped carry it forward as well. And it's really grown there quite exponentially. And through technology of digital channels. So, it's hard to put your finger on one thing that's made the sport grow. And I think we've attacked it from so many different areas. But it's not, Asia's not on its own. We're seeing significant growth throughout Europe, and Mark's in your part of the world. We're seeing increase in viewing figures. We're seeing increase in activity. We're seeing an increase in talent and people that want to play. So that's very encouraging. There's been some quite big exhibitions around Finland and Stockholm in this area, going over the last few years, and it's really a sport for everybody. It's very accessible. I mentioned earlier that we've got a system where anybody can make it. And actually, one of the greatest stories has to be our current world champion, Xiao Xintong. Xiao Xintong was one of our students in our academy in Beijing in the early days. He was off the tour. for a while. He came back. He came back by having to qualify for the World Snooker Tour. So he started out about 8 or 9 months ago, right at the very bottom. Okay, so he's an amateur player. He's playing in our open qualifying, amateur championships, and so on. He's playing in something that we call Q Tour Europe, which is one section of a tour qualifying. Within there, he won some of those events. He then earned an opportunity as an amateur player to play in a top-up place at the World Snooker Championships earlier this year. He then went through qualifying in the World Snooker Championships, then turned up at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield and won the World Championships as an amateur player. Now, name me another sport that you can do that in and go from zero to hero in the space of a few months. And that's something I'm very proud of in the structure that we've got in this sport, because it does mean wherever you go in the world, you can say to those people, you know what? If you're good enough, you can lift the World Championship trophy by May, and you can be the biggest star in the sport if you're good enough and if you can do it. And that, I think, is a really unique thing. And one of my focuses certainly in the last 4 or 5 years has been breaking down those barriers and boundaries that sometimes exist in ordinary federation structures. We're not a sport where you have to play for your country, then have to go to European championships or Asian championships, then have to go and play for medals in the games, then have to enter the professional tour. That we're not like that. Our sport is completely open from day one. And I think that is exactly what sport should be like.
Definitely. And I mean, there are other sports, like I work in the ice hockey business regularly. And I mean, that's a sport that struggles with increasing participation for several reasons. But as you said, there's a low barrier to entry to get into snooker. So that works in your favor, obviously. But then you mentioned like you could be the world champion in a year or something if you're good enough. That's obviously a good thing and you can like improve in the sport. But also, does that say something about the level of the sport that you can be the world champion in so short time?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Marcus, actually. It's a good one to challenge me on, because it isn't like you can just go somewhere and say, oh, by the way, if you take up snooker next week, you could be the world championship by May. You could be world championship by May. It won't work that way, because the sport is so incredibly difficult. I mean, it is incredibly technical. We always describe snooker as it's intense technical skill with a game of chess riding over the top of it. So you have strategy, you have technique, plotting, planning ahead. You've got all this strategy that you would find in the game of chess. But actually, underneath that, you have to be technically superb. And there are so many players in the world that you look at them in practice and you go, wow, this guy's going to win the world championship. Or this woman, by the way, because we're a mixed gender sport. Let me put that on the table. There are 4 women competing on the World Snooker Tour. Now, you look at that and the technical side, you can perfect it. To be able to deliver that in front of hundreds of millions of people on broadcast at the right time, now that's a different skill. That requires that little bit of fairy dust, bit of magic. And we see it from time to time. But the difference is that the opportunity is there. And when we're going into Africa, the African Championships are coming up soon. A player from Africa will qualify for the World Snooker Tour. Africa's a big country. It's untapped, actually, for our sport. We know that Northern African territories, Morocco, very good for snooker. We know that there's very, very good snooker in South Africa. But actually, there's so many areas where we don't know. Now, we know there's going to be limited facilities in some of those places, but we do know there are facilities, and we do know that people play through our data. And that means that we don't know where the next talented player is going to come from. But it means we can go to any continent in the world, any country in the world, go on the ground, start to create a little bit of infrastructure, whether that be local league, local qualifying, or whatever it is. And somewhere by winning in that system, you can get to the next level and so on very quickly. So I think it's about providing opportunity. I think if you asked what we actually do all day, I think we provide opportunity. That's what we do.
That's a good statement. Provide opportunity. I like that. And you mentioned that there are women competing on the men's championships as well, which is really interesting because you mentioned chess. I had an episode about chess a while ago, and they are separate. And I talked about that in my little knowledge of chess is thinking that you could mix men and women, but that individual was saying that it's more physically demanding than you think, and that therefore there are separate between men and women. But it's really interesting to hear that in your sport you have it mixed. So how's the thinking around that?
It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, there are so many debates around this right now over this is it's a really timely question, Marcus, because now everybody's saying, it's particularly physical sports, but there's lots of talk about physical sports. You can't put men and women together. Well, that's blatantly obvious that you're not going to put, somebody much bigger and stronger than somebody else in a ring and start boxing. That's blatantly obvious. Now, with our sport, like I said, it's technical. It's technical. It's mental. It's not physical strength, although maybe there's an argument to say somebody could hit the ball harder than somebody else. That's not going to win you a snooker match, by the way. And I speak as somebody who's played at a very high standard. So it is an interesting mix. I will just correct you though, Marcus. There is no such thing as a men's game in snooker. Okay, so we'll start from that position. The World Snooker Tour is an open tour. There is only one thing that you need in order to get there to the top, and that is to be good enough and win matches. And we don't care if it's men, women, whatever gender. Everybody's welcome on the World Snooker Tour, but you have to be good enough and you have to earn it. And through the systems that we've developed, people do earn it. And one of the things we have done is promoted World Women's Snooker. So this is an organisation underneath the WPBSA. We govern it. World Women's Snooker was predominantly, it started a bit like WPBSA all those years ago. It was a small group of people playing and running world championships and so on. And it's kind of held its own, and there's always been women playing to a very high standard in snooker. What we hadn't seen is women progress to the latter stages of major events. And I think there's two reasons for that. One, I don't think it's ever been tested properly. I think we can honestly say that will a woman ever win the world championship against men? We don't know. Nobody actually knows because it's never been tested. Why has it never been tested? Because predominantly women have been at a significant disadvantage in our sport for many years, not in recent times. What you have now is clubs where men and women compete. You have leagues where men and women compete, amateur events where men and women compete. There is no restriction in our sports. And what you do every so often is see a really talented female athlete coming through. There's a lady called Bai Lu from China who's just won the Women's World Championship. She broke through last year by winning the Women's Championship. She's won it 2 years running now. But actually, she's broken into the World Snooker Tour, and she's already started to beat some very serious male players over proper matches in the same conditions, on the same field of play, under the same rules. There are no advantages, disadvantages. Now, there are a lot of arguments out there whether our sport is gender affected, is it or not? And, it's subject to a great debate. I think we all accept men and women are different. That is a fact of life. But am I going to say that a woman will never be as good as a man? Never. Because we don't know. And we do know that the women that we've seen playing to that high standard have played as good as men on the day.
You said that women historically have been at a disadvantage in your sport. So what has that been?
I think it's history. It's history and it's culture. I mentioned earlier that the history of snooker has evolved out of sort of the great country houses. If you watch Downton Abbey on TV, it's a very famous series. That is where billiards was. Billiards was in the billiard room in those great country houses. And what you had there was a situation where the gentleman would go to the billiard room for brandy and billiards after dinner. So what you had is a very male environment where billiards and snooker evolved from. Now, that doesn't mean to say that, women didn't play over the years. They did. In fact, I'm told Mary Queen of Scots was very fond of billiards. I also know that Marie Antoinette was very fond of billiards because her cue is in the museum in China. So there are some, it was not the done thing for women to play billiards and snooker. for many years. So I guess some of the great women that have played over the years, like a lady called Vera Selby, those they were breaking the boundaries, I guess. And we still have throughout the 80s, you had a situation where many snooker clubs were in industrial towns, which were very, very heavy industries, where you would find that men would work in the industry. Take it from my life. I was born in a coal mining town. My father was a coal miner. All my family were coal miners. I was the only one not to go down the coal mine in my town from my family. So it was it evolved in that environment where clubs were working men's clubs or clubs connected to the industry. And they were generally full of men who were probably popping in for a drink on their way home from work, game of snooker and billiards. So it kind of evolved in that very male environment. What we've done over the years is make a conscious effort to change that. And that is to make sure that the clubs we recognise are mixed gender, have got disabled access and so on. And we're trying to create an environment which is a family-friendly environment for our sport. And I think we're really seeing the difference in that now. There are some beautiful clubs around the world now, which you can walk in there, men, women, children, everybody's playing. And I love to see this, It didn't exist when I was young. It does exist today. And for that reason, there are a lot less women playing snooker than there are men currently. But the number of women is growing fast. And the number of women playing to a high standard is also growing. So, who knows one day what will happen. But we will never stop women playing in the Open Mixed World Snooker Tour. But we do have a women's game because we do that to create an environment to encourage more women to take up the sport. And I think that's right because they're underrepresented.
Yeah, I agree. So it sounds to me that it was more the perception of the sport that was exclusive historically more than its sport itself.
Yeah, and again, actually, Marcus, just to add to that, when we've done programs, we've gone into schools and done something called Q-Zone in schools. We find that the students that want to carry on playing is something like 40% girls. So we know there's interest in the sport, and we also know that we have a large female viewership of our sport as well. And actually, if you look at a snooker venue when a major event is on, you will see one of the most mixed audiences you will see at any sporting event. And that, I think, is something quite unique to snooker.
I think you're right. Speaking about growing the sport, developing, if we're talking about Olympic inclusion, so where do you see snooker within the Olympic movement? And I know that was part of the Paralympics for a while, but it's never been in the Olympics. So where do you see snooker's involvement in the Olympics going forward?
Look, I may be biased, Marcus, but my view is that snooker is made for the Olympic Games. We're a global sport representing every aspect of society. And I think we have such a lot to bring to the Olympic Games. We certainly have a vast viewership that we can bring to the Olympic Games. We have a young audience in many parts of the world. We have a very mixed audience, which is something we've spoken about. And snooker's got a lot of assets. It's a great sport in the community. It's a great sport for getting people active again. We know people are stuck on their computers these days, and we're all talking about getting our children outdoors these days. But there are other sports like ours. So we think we've got a lot to offer. I believe that snooker should be in the Olympic Games. I firmly believe that. And I also believe that our sport is big enough for the IOC for them to see the value. So the journey is long, unfortunately. The journey is long. When we started this conversation, you mentioned the word billiards. We have a body which is recognized by the IOC. It is called the World Confederation of Billiard Sports. This is the body that has the opportunity to make a bid for the Olympic Games. Now, I was involved in a bid for Paris with my team. And actually, we were doing very well in that bid. We did very well from almost a zero start. We've done quite well and got towards the sort of top end of sports that had the potential of getting in the Paris Games. Unfortunately, there's a lot of politics in this. You have snooker, you have pool, you have a game called carom, you have all the different formats of pool. So there's a lot of politics involved. And my job now is to try and unravel all that and try and work with as many people as possible to make it possible that billiard sports can join the Olympic program. You mentioned the Paralympics. Snooker was one of the founding sports to the Paralympic Games. It was there from day one, which grew out of Stoke Mandeville Hospital, people in recovery from various injuries and so on. And it fell out later. It fell out of the games later, really due to a lack of administration, because we as a body were just looking after professional snooker. The amateur bodies were predominantly volunteer run. And there was this situation where the administration really wasn't there to keep it going. What we've done under the WPBSA in the last 10 years, we've built an organization called World Disability Billiards and Snooker. It was three of us in a room and 2 players, and an idea that one day we could go back to the Paralympic Games. I have to tell you, it's now ready. 10 years on, we have built an infrastructure in disability snooker where we have events going on around the world. We have every category organized and professionalized where it can be managed properly. We have the processes in place to be able to take the sport to where we want to go. And it's really exciting, this journey, because the next step is to start to make those approaches to the IPC to say, look, we've got a sport that was a founding sport to the Paralympic Games. It's ready. Here you are. We will fund it. We will come forward and say, look, we'll bring it for you free of charge. We will bring it because we believe in what we're doing. And how will that be funded? Well, we'll fund that through the commercialization of other activities within the organization. And that's the way we work. We take a percentage of income and percentage of profits on other things, and we heavily reinvest back into the sport. And I think that's been the success of the last 16 years, delivering the growth. So Paralympics may come before the Olympics. Realistically, the Olympics 2032 is probably the first time that we could ever be on the Olympics. LA is very late in the day. There's a lot of competitive sports in America, as we know. But actually, Australia is very attractive because we have good infrastructure. We have great players. In fact, former world champion Neil Robertson from Australia. You know, we've got a real opportunity there to actually make an impact. And I hope that I'm still in this position to be able to drive that forward, because I think that's the dream one day. It will never replace the World Championship. It will never replace the tour. But what it will do, it will put the sport on another pedestal, it will be seen in another light, and it will give the opportunity for governments around the world to fund that sport development on the ground properly, instead of us racing around the world trying to build all these little teams and keep it going. So I think it's a dream for us to go to the Olympic Games.
Yeah, I understand that. And 2032, that's 7 years ahead. So
timing is good. I'm going to Switzerland next week, funny enough.
Yes, you're starting. So that's really I mean, it's a long process, as you said, but that's something that you're really, already starting or have started, although it's like 7 years ahead, playing the long game.
Yeah, listen, it is a long game, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a long game.
Yeah. I would like to talk about now we've talked a lot about snooker, but your career. You mentioned that you got into snooker and you were a player. I think you were 12 when you started playing, when you picked up a cue for the first time. That seems late in my mind. Like when you start a sport, usually you are 5, 6, 7. So were you late, or is it usually that age?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thank you for asking, actually. It's not often I get to talk about myself. I'm normally talking about everything else. But I started a little bit earlier than that, but on a very small table at home, which was balanced on top of 2 chairs in my house. I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a very industrial town, a mining town. My father crawled in a tunnel, 18, only, less than 2 meters high. He spent his life digging coal, and it was very industrial town, very heavy industry. And through that period, there was one common thing about mining families, is that they would go to holiday camps every so often. And I went to a holiday camp called the Butlins holiday camp in the UK, in Wales. And I walked into this billiard room. I was probably only about 10 at this point, but I walked in there and this billiard room was there and the balls clicking. I was absolutely mesmerized by this place. And it's a feeling that still lives with me today when I walk into those arenas and I see everything working. I absolutely love this feeling, and I fell in love with the sport. But to play snooker, I mean, these were full size tables, which is 12 feet by 6 in old measurements. It's quite difficult, and you have to find facilities. But fortunately, in industrial towns in the UK, we had some of these facilities in these clubs, as I mentioned earlier. But the obvious place to start was a small table. I was given a small table. It was 5 feet. It was 5 feet by half the size width, and the balls were really small, like little tiny things. And I played on this table every day as a child. And then I reached an age where I was getting quite good on this little table, and then I started to play in local leagues and some local competitions. Joined a local club, and during that time of transition into local clubs, because when I was young, you usually had to be 16 or 18 to be able to play in one of the billiard halls because they were licensed premises for alcohol. So it was quite difficult to find facilities back then. But my father was a craftsman, really. He could make anything from anything. And we didn't grow up with a lot of money, but we grew up in I grew up in the most wonderful, loving family. And my father was intent that I needed to train a bit. I had a bit of talent. I'd shown signs that I could actually play this game, and it was becoming big on television in the UK. My hero was Steve Davis, and he won the World Championship 6 times. So my father actually built another table at home. He made a billiard table, 6 feet by 3. So this was 2 meters by 1 roughly. And the balls were slightly bigger and the pockets were slightly smaller, and it was tough. It was a little training table. But because we lived in a small bungalow, a small house, and it folded away on its side and it had some wheels on it and it pushed against the wall. And we used to pull this table out, lift it up, push the chair underneath it, and I would play on this table. Mum would be lying underneath watching TV. And that was how I grew up. And I actually learned to play snooker on this table. And one of the great stories about this table is that not only did it give me the opportunity to improve, because it was really well done, it actually gave me an idea when I came back as an administrator. About 12 years ago, we decided to go into schools. And my head of coaching, who is Chris Lovell, who's head of coaching and training at the WPBSA, he said, Q zone in schools, great idea. So we're going to go into schools, put some small tables in. I thought, you know what? I have just the thing at home for this. I still have this small table my father built. So I took the design over to China to our table manufacturer. I said, I want you to make me these. They fold away. They're on wheels. There's a handle on the side. We can drag them. So if you imagine a table tennis table folded up, we have a billiard table the same. Okay. So it's folded on its side, and you can put 5 of them or 10 of them in a cupboard, lock the door. You can go in 10 minutes later. You can turn a sports hall in a school into a billiard room. Okay. So this table, I had it mass manufactured by Xingpa in China. We now give these tables away all over the world. And this table is now in schools. It's in our Q zone areas. Anybody who's visited our World Snooker Tour events, they'll be playing on these small tables outside the Crucible Theatre. This table is the design that my father made for me when I was a child. And so anyway, moving on from that, when I was about 16, I was playing in more serious competitions, local events, local leagues. And when I was 19, I won an event called the Pontins Mercantile Credit Classic. This was one of the World Snooker Tour qualifying series events, and I won this event. And I guess at the time it was probably the biggest amateur event in the world that you could ever win. And that really set me on a new road to train harder, train full time, and try and become a professional player. I was runner up in the World Junior Championship in Iceland in 1989 to Ken Doherty. Ken went on to win the World Amateur afterwards, and he went on to win the World Professional Championship, only player to win all 3. So he beat me in the final of the World Junior Championship. But the following year in 1990, Ken's still a great friend of mine, we, in the same arena, we both qualified for our professional tour card. And this was at Blackpool, which is a holiday destination. And so I was 21 years old. So I turned professional when I was 21 years old. I played full time for 14 years, but for the last 4 years, I was also running the governing body with a group of players as well. And so that's pretty much my life. So snooker's in the blood, shall we say, and we're all on a piece of elastic to this sport. We'll never get away from it. We'll all bounce back, come springing back to it. And it's been a great honor for me to be able to serve the sport as I have done for the last 16 years.
I think I read somewhere that you have been in snooker for a long time and worked as been a player, been an administrator, but also I think I read somewhere you ran like a bike shop or something at some point. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it wasn't a bike shop actually. I got involved when I left snooker completely. I left snooker. I left the WPBSA, and this is early 2000s, and I stopped playing at the time as well. So, life goes through these changes and small children come along and things and, life gets complicated. And so I had a little bit more of a simple life, but I actually part-owned with a partner, a business. It was actually an automotive business. We were involved in automotive parts for cars. So we were supplying automotive parts locally, but it did have a bike shop in it, actually, in this business. It had a site, which is where I think the line came from. So I did this for a few years. And then during that time, a man that used to look after me as my snooker manager when I was playing snooker, he was a property developer from London, but he lived in my town. And he was good to me when I was young. In fact, he was the person that sent me to the World Junior Championships in 1989, which was, a huge thing really back then. His name was Ray Schilling. And Ray came to me and he said, "Look, Tracy," he said, "you're back in the town now locally." He said, I want you to come and join the local council with me." He said, "I lived in an old mining town where the mine no longer existed. So if you ever see, the changes in a mining town, what happens is the industry collapses and so does everything else. And there was no work for miles around where I lived. There was no industry, there was no jobs. The shops were closing. These towns were dying. And he asked me to join the local town council, the local political group. And I did. I thought, why not? I saw another project in my life. So I joined the town council and I got involved in the regeneration of my town. And we started building, we actually acquired the coal mine and turned it into a charity. And raised money, built industrial units, built offices, created jobs. In fact, the head office for Center Parcs, the holiday company, came onto the site. Supermarkets, we transformed our town. It was only a small town, but we transformed it. And that year, we won the award for the most enterprising zone in Britain. And we were all volunteers doing this job. And it was really great. But actually, not long after that, they made me the mayor of the town. So I ended up as the town mayor, and I served the town as its mayor for 12 months. There are only 12-month cycles as mayor in this role. So I was the mayor of my town for 12 months. It was a small town in Newark and Sherwood. So you would know this as Robin Hood country. Okay, so this was my area, and it was during that time I was serving the town as mayor. My intention was to go to make the route into Parliament from there at some point. My intention, I was really interested in politics, and still am. And that it was at that point where I was about to go down that road and follow that political career when the phone rang, and it was Barry, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well," he said, "Is it right you're the mayor of your town?" I said, "Yeah." So that was how that conversation started. And I guess the rest is history. That's 16 years ago. And we actually scratched out what we thought snooker should look like going forward. I'd been out of the sport for such a long time that it was really nice to look at it with a clean view of not being in the sport. And I had no vested interest in it whatsoever. And it was great to look at it and say, "What would you do if you came back?" And I said, "Well, I think we should do this." And this didn't work before because the politics were getting involved and the commercials too ingrained in this side of things. And that's how we broke the sport up. And we mapped it out. And I guess I guess politically, that political experience of working in that environment gave me an opportunity to work in that environment in sport. And it certainly stood me in good stead in my work in China, because we were heavily ingrained with government office there.
Yeah, I was going to say that I'm sure that political experience like plays in very handy now when, working in government, sports government, and as you said, like going to other countries and talking to IOC and all of these different aspects.
Yeah, it's economics, isn't it? If you were to pick a subject, it would be economics, because the economics of sport are fascinating. We've one or two great examples in our sport. Sheffield is a great example. Home of the World Snooker Championship, Sheffield. What's happened with Sheffield? It's such a well-known area now. It's become so international. There are so many Chinese students in Sheffield now, and we'd like to think we'd had a bit of a part to play in that because the sport's so big in China. You could go down the street in Beijing now and say, "Name me 3 cities in China, in England." They'll go London, Sheffield, be number 2. And then they'll say Manchester United or something like that because they relate everything to football. But it's become really famous. But what it's brought is investment. It's brought infrastructure investment, shops, hotels, international chains. And Sheffield is, again, it's an industrial city, completely unrecognizable to what it was. It's now a fast-moving, beautiful environment to work in. I absolutely love this city. And another one, when you talk about the economics of sport, I think one of the biggest stories that we could tell is a city in China called Yushan. Yushan it's about 2.5 hours by train from Shanghai. And as we were going around China trying to build new events and find new opportunities, a small city came along and said, we love this sport. We want to do something. So we began there by delivering a World Snooker ranking event in a sports hall in a school. And it started quite small. And we went back there a few years, and it was a little bit off the beaten track. So it was quite a journey to get there. And it wasn't that popular. But actually, what happened over time was, as China has developed, the city decided to adopt our sport and said, you know what, we can build so much more here. We can do so much more with this sport. We want it in the schools. We want it in the education centres. We want it in our recreation areas. We want it in our older people's homes and our aging population. We want them to play your sport. So what we did, we got involved in the city there. And over the period of time, we've developed, it began with a 4,000 seat stadium being built for Q Sports. And that went up pretty quick, because things do in China. What followed on from that was an academy. There is now a big billiard sports academy, all Q Sports, by the way, in there as well. Big billiard sports academy on the side of that in Yushan. There's accommodation there. There are students there. There are coaches there. There's all kinds of training going on there. And then at the side of that, we've now opened the World Billiard Sports Museum. So now this city that was once off the beaten track and quite old in terms of its look is now a modern looking city with a huge amount of infrastructure for our sport. And what's happened with that? The new brands are moving in. The Hilton has moved in. Starbucks have moved in. You're now seeing international brands move in around our sport. And they're designing Western streets. This is in the middle of China. And even the riverside has been reshaped now, and there's all snooker balls around everywhere. And there's a bridge over there, and that is now called Snooker Bay, believe it or not. Snooker Bay. And they play the snooker on the bridge at night. And you know what? That is a massive development in our sport when you look at it. And it's a great journey. It's something that began with just a small event that's turned into a whole economic regeneration. And that city is now known as the first world billiards city. There you go.
There you go. Great story. Love it. No, we're almost on time here, but is there something I haven't asked you yet that you feel is important to mention?
Oh, it's a good question. It's a great question. No, I think you've covered most things. I think you covered a little bit about me. You've covered a bit about the sport, the economics of it. And no, I just think, if I could just say anything, I think it's just, I just want to give this sport to the world. I want everybody to have the opportunity to play. And big targets for us. What are the future target markets is probably one. We're probably a little bit weaker in the US than we'd like to be. A lot of big sports in the UK, a lot of big competitive sports. Snooker is growing very fast in the Americas. It's ground infrastructure, so it's qualifying events, it's national championships, it's amateur events. But we're seeing a big increase in clubs opening. We're seeing a big increase in people watching. Viewership is up on our digital channels. So I think if there's one thing that you could ask is where do we go next? Where are the big opportunities? The Americas are a huge opportunity for snooker, and at this moment in time, it's relatively untapped and it's growing fast. And I think one day we will touch every continent in the world. And when I say we'll give every child a cue, one day, hopefully on my watch, we'll be able to achieve that, give everybody the opportunity.
I hope so too. I'd like to end with a networking question. So who from your network do you think would be a good guest on this podcast?
That's great. From my network, I would say Simon Brownell. Simon Brownell is the chief executive of the World Snooker Tour. Simon is heavily involved in the development of the commercial side. So if you want to talk about statistics and numbers and tickets and viewerships and all those things, Simon would be great. The other one is my vice chairman and head of integrity is an interesting guy. He is he does a lot of integrity work with us, so he's involved in a lot of anti-corruption strategies and things like that. Former chief superintendent of the Metropolitan Police as well. He's had a very interesting life. So Nigel would be good. And I think the other one, if you were to look at some of the projects that we've got around, women's snooker is going to be a great story to tell. And we have our head of communications, Matt Hewitt, who is heavily involved in women's snooker. And there's a story to tell there, and it's growing. It's not there yet, but it's coming.
That's 3 great suggestions. Thanks so much. Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
Marcus, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And let's not leave it so long next time.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.